phones. So I assume you're going to be showing off those devices.
No, I just want to show off my phones.
Yeah. So, Christian, on to you.
Okay, thanks for coming. I see an amazing amount of women in the audience again. That's good. I'm not a waiter, I'm just dressed like one. I just realized that this morning, because I came from England with all the stuff, because I used to live in Mumbai for quite a while, and Mumbai monsoon's time was basically like, don't bring anything that you want to look good, because everything is just so wet and like soaked through 24/7. So I didn't bring anything, and I'm like, yeah, okay. So we went shopping yesterday. So I explained to Robert, and Ali, who both been to India for the first time, what Fab India is about, and like they went shopping there. And my favorite about Robert, ask him to show that picture when you go to his workshop later as well. He's that Swedish guy that prepares everything, and like wanting everything perfectly prepared and ordered and going to India doesn't go together too well. So he actually got a lot of money out in Sweden in rupees, so he has rupees, which I didn't know even works, because in England they always tell me like, oh, we can't give you rupees, that's illegal, because you can't bring them out of the country or whatever. So he has like 5,000 rupees in 150 rupee notes. Yesterday we went to Fab India, we bought things, and their cash point didn't work, their cash reader didn't work, so they're like, oh, we only can take cash now, and I'm like, okay, so we went to the cash point and got it, and Robert went to his hotel room, and he had like 2,200 rupees he bought things for, his wife and his children, and it took two guys behind the counter to count his money, to have like this big pile of money for the clothes that he bought, and like, for him it was the worst thing ever, because Europeans don't like to inconvenience other people, so seeing two guys having to count the money for like 5 minutes in front of us, we're like, sorry, I didn't want to it was good fun. So yeah, I've been here before, and it's fun to see how Bangalore changes, because right now it's much easier to get around. We used to actually film each other trying to cross MG Road and how long it takes people to do it, and as I explained to Robert, like, just go straight and don't change your pace. It's like a computer game, like a jump and run game. As soon as you stop, people run you over. Like basically just go through, and like, yeah, and if they sound the horn, they just like sounding the horn. There's really no meaning to it any longer. Well, we have this button to sound the horn. The button here stops it from sounding, I guess. That's basically what it is. But it's cool to see that not many people die in the street here, because it's like seeing that there's no lanes, or there's lane on demand system. You got two cars, and then you pull in between them, and somehow there's space. It always fascinates me, like, okay, that works. Although one thing drives me nuts, and I don't know if you know this, if you look like me, people realize somehow I'm not from here. I don't know why. Something gives it away. And in the past, when I used to take a rickshaw, I paid the extra price. I don't care. You know, it was like 20 rupees for you guys, and it's like 50 or 80 or 120 for me. It's still much, much cheaper than going out of my house in London, because you pay as soon as you get out of the house or something. Nowadays, they say, oh, 10 rupee, 20 rupee. You go into the rickshaw. They don't bring you where you want to go. They bring you to some shop where they ask you to look around for like 10 minutes. Don't feel you need to buy anything. Just look around, and then they come up with some story why they can't drive you where you're going. Oh, there's a riot, or there's a celebration. There's no way to get through. And I'm like, you mean the road is blocked like it is all the time? Or what do you mean by this? So, and they drop you in a shop and basically ask you to buy things, and but you don't need to buy. But actually, you feel like, okay, this guy has a deal with the shop owner that buys him his petrol or something like that. So you feel like I should buy something. But there's only so many wooden elephants that you need in your life, and these shops are amazing, because you go in, you only see Westerners looking around like, I need to buy something and I don't know what's going on, like. So, and then they drive you later on where you're going. So no matter where you go, it always takes you 40 minutes, even if it's just down the road. It's just very annoying. So if you like Western people and you see them running around MG Road, just go in the rickshaw with them, so they don't stop them at shops, and just drop them off. That would be a startup. Just get people to hire them to drive with Westerners in rickshaws so they don't get ripped off. That'd be awesome. Anyways, that's completely off topic, but that's not a problem. So, I'm Chris. I'm a developer evangelist at Mozilla, the principal developer evangelist. I'm also an accredited trainer, and I love giving workshops. And a workshop means mostly it's 5 to 10 people that you know what they do, and know who they are, so you actually know how to train them properly. So when I heard this is a 3-hour workshop and I have no idea how many people are coming or what you guys know or what you want to know, I was a bit So okay, I'm just ad-libbing this complete thing right now. So if you have questions later, we can go through questions. And also when I met Zainab in London, she was all like, yeah, and come to JSFU, and I'm like, oh, visa, and because the visa is not fun. Like no. Like the amount of red tape that people from the Indian embassy give back to people who live in England, maybe as payback or something like that, is absolutely incredible. The amount of stuff that I had to do. My favorite was like, list all the countries that you have been in the last 5 years. And in my case, that's 37 countries. And the input field was like 100 characters. So I thought, okay, they just want to know like that if I have been to like countries like Pakistan, Syria, Egypt, and so I didn't list those. I just went with the safest bets. I was like Switzerland, Finland, Sweden, Germany. Like, okay, they can't say anything against that. It's gonna be fine. So I got my visa and everything, and I said, okay, I want to do something cool. So when I proposed my funnel thing, I just basically proposed everything I know, and I'm like, I'm gonna force myself to write the best presentation, the best training materials ever, which I didn't. But I know all this stuff, so that's good. So I want to talk about HTML5, and I want to talk about HTML5 in the mobile world, in the desktop world. Because we've been promised HTML5 for a long time now, and we've like, oh, what is HTML5? We don't even know anymore. Like everything is HTML5 because it sells better now if you say it's HTML5. I got job offers as HTML6 developer. I got that on LinkedIn, and I just want to go to the interview to see what they say. This would be interesting to see. I'm like, I only prepared CSS4. Is that okay? Because it's just everything is like Flash reloaded. I mean, you see all these pages that are just huge. Which was that the other day? I mean, Oakley is a big one. Let's see if that's still alive. There's this website out there that is just saying like, oh, we're using HTML5. It's a HTML showcase. Well, that's a good sign about the connection. Let's use HTML5 because it's much better than Flash. And it's like this 23 megabyte website with like 415 different loading things. And you're like, this is not helping. This is not making the technology better. That's just slowing down people's computer again. Okay, we're offline again? Okay, that's going to be fun. And on the other hand, we have these mobile interfaces which are like, oh, here's 3 buttons and 1 input field. That's what people want on a mobile. And then people say, okay, I like native more on a mobile because the experience is so much better. All the HTML5 stuff looks like a bad website. So we have to find a way in the middle. And I think the biggest problem that we have as developers is that we have this thing in the back of our head that things don't work. We've been, as web developers, and I've been web developer for 16 years now, we always get disappointed every single time we look at stuff. Every time the browser says like, we found a new technology, awesome, let's try that out, and the browser, okay. So our end users will be excited about that 2 years after we learned it. And by that time, we unlearned it already again. And funnily enough, this is not the case any longer. We have new browsers every 6 weeks. And people upgrade their browsers as well, especially on mobile devices. It's pretty good. On Android, not so much, because there's a stock browser that doesn't get upgraded with the operating system. But on others, we have these new functionalities, and we shouldn't be afraid of using them. A lot of times we are afraid of using them because we think of legacy browsers. Okay. Fair enough. We have these legacy browsers that we have to support. Internet Explorer 6. The dirty word, you know? And the question there is, how do we support them? Like a lot of people use jQuery for everything and animate everything in JavaScript because Internet Explorer 6 does that as well. Then they don't even test on the browser any longer and just hope it performs. Because testing on Internet Explorer 6 is a pain in the lower backside, to keep it like that. Because you have to actually get a Windows machine if you don't have one, or a virtual machine to actually put it in there. You have to use Internet Explorer 6, which you yourself haven't done in 12 years, and still remember when it was like connecting to things.
How do I type hash on your keyboard?
Oh, it doesn't work. It's a British keyboard. So hash.
That's very strange. You show the password to.
It's your password, so I don't care.
Let's see. This should work.
Okay. And so what we need to understand by now is that support, we're not doing ourselves a favor to get old browsers to do new technology and new effects. Because we put extra effort onto our testing, and we actually disappoint users. You know, if I'm on IE6, I'm not used to beauty. I'm used to terrible things out there. I'm used to things that just work. And I'd rather us build things that work than look beautiful and don't work. A button that doesn't do anything is not helpful to anybody out there. So yeah, this is basically the website. And if you look at this, it's like 23 meg or something like that, and everything is huge, and everything has to change when you scroll, and it's like Flash reloaded. So to me, support for older browsers means make the thing work. Make it as basic as possible. Think of the most basic way of building something, and then make it pretty and amazing and better in other browsers. And wrap it in an if statement. The cool thing about CSS as a technology is it is already an if statement. When you apply CSS to something and the browser can't do it, it doesn't do it. That's awesome. In JavaScript, it shows an error and says like, I can't do that. Which of course is in CSS sometimes annoying for debugging, like why didn't it do it? But in essence, what you do is apply something only when it works. And there's great examples for that. I'm writing a chapter for a book right now, and this is the demo site that I wrote for that. It's basically a vanilla web diet. And dun dun dun. Also have it on my hard drive if necessary. This is going to be a long day. Yeah, that's the wrong one. Dun dun dun. No. Yes. So this here, guess how much JavaScript is in there? One line. And the line is to actually do the hash at the end of the page. The rest is all done with CSS and clever HTML. Because when you resize that now as well, when you go down to a lower resolution, you get this. And this is exactly what I give Internet Explorer 6. This works. It's not amazing, it's not pretty, but it doesn't promise things that it can't keep. And that's the biggest problem that we build with interfaces nowadays. We give promises to people, and then when they get laggy, then they start complaining about HTML5. Because it's not that their machine is too slow, it's just that we made a mistake. And this is super simple to do, and we're going to do a few exercises like that later on. And it's just a matter of like thinking the right way before you actually start building it. Sadly enough, in a lot of companies, our processes are broken. Like, we get a Photoshop file, and then they tell us this is how it looks like. And if it doesn't look like that, we don't get a new job. If it doesn't look like that, we're not having done the job. And if a website looks exactly the same on every platform, on every browser, on every device, we've done a terrible mistake. We actually didn't use the web. We put a JPEG on the internet. This is what it does. Like, the power of the internet, the power of the web, is that it adapts to your needs. If I'm on a bad connection, I should get a simpler interface. If I'm on a bad browser, I should get a simpler interface. If I'm on an awesome browser, I should get the beautiful interface. If I'm on a fast connection, it should load the stuff for me while it's doing it. What drives me nuts right now is when I look at a lot of websites and I see these preloaders. Like the 0%, 1%, 62%, wait for a coffee, get a coffee, 80%, 62, 9. This is Flash. We've done this. This is like, there's nothing is so important that people should wait 5 minutes to see your website. Like, find ways to load these things when people are using things. One thing I have not seen yet, and I've said it a few times, When you have a massive form in your page, like a login form, for example, why don't you have an onFocus handler on the first form field? If the user clicks in this field and starts typing in their username, start loading stuff in the background. Because you know the user is busy with filling in the form. There's got to be 3 minutes of user interaction that is annoying to do. So you might as well do something good for that user by loading some stuff in the background while they're doing it. Oh, another great thing was coming here was like getting my visa on the embassy website. Like I know I have to put a lot of my data in there, like my name, my birth date, my mother's maiden name, blood sample, whatever they wanted of me. And the SSL certificate is broken. So, hey, we're a safe website, except we're not. And like, you know, all the data goes somewhere on the internet. Don't worry about it. Nobody's listening. Oh wait, they do. So, what I want to talk about now in a quick presentation, and it's going to be an interactive one, so you can ask questions as well when you want to see this, is about CSS3 and things that you might not know. CSS3 is another one thing where you see all these showcases like, look, I can make a rotating menu on a cube with like music on each side, because every client always asks you for that. Like the amount of times my clients came to me and said like, oh, rotating cube is what we want. It's incredible. Instead, there's so many things in there that we have in CSS3 that are incredibly useful, but we don't use them because the browser who shall not be named didn't support them. The browser who shall not be named in version 9 and 10 now does support them. So, and even Microsoft says don't use the old one any longer. So let's think about what we can do with this. So let's think about what we can use CSS for, which we now use JavaScript a lot of times, which doesn't perform and is actually bad for the performance of your application or your site. But I'm going to explain why JavaScript has problems with that later. CSS defines the look and feel of your product. As simple as that. Anything that is visual, anything that might change, should go in your CSS. Because if you put your great JavaScript widget, jQuery widget, and you put a blue color scheme in there, and the main color scheme of the page changes to green later on, and people change the CSS and it's still blue in there, they're just going to delete the jQuery plugin and try to find the next one they don't understand. Nobody's going to go in the jQuery plugin and change the colors in there. Keep things where you expect them to be. That's as simple as it is. Everything that is look and feel, that used to be in older browsers just colors, fonts, layout, and now it's actually interaction, animation, transitions, and also sometimes interactivity, should go in your CSS. The reason is simple. This is where people look for it. This is where people maintain it. This is where you can change it in one page. As soon as you put like inline styles, for example, into a page, or font tags, which if you do, I know where you live and I'm going to hurt you. People are not going to find it out. Like every time you try to debug something and you wonder why that color is still blue, somebody put like a style element in the page itself. And that's just lazy, and that's just very, very dangerous. The other reason, of course, is that CSS is part of the browser's rendering. The browser, this looks like a browser is doing nothing. It's actually 60 times a second, 60 frames per second. It's actually painting this thing. Nothing changes in that one, so it doesn't do anything with it. It has no problem with it. But it still does 60 times a second something. So every time you do that with CSS, it's also part of that 60 seconds. Every time you change it with JavaScript, you intercept that. And you say like, no, place, I have changed already, you have to start again, and then the browser starts getting, and it starts flickering, and when you scroll it, it starts looking strange things. And we have tools for that nowadays, like in, for example, in developer tools in Firefox, which is strangely enough the browser that I'm using. You've got this thing here, and that one actually shows you when something happened. So I clicked on that one now, and the whole page was reflowed, and that one bullet point was reflowed. And the second time as well. The Mozilla thing up there was blinking, and the bullet point was blinking. So you can actually test. Why something is slow by looking at that. You know when the browser is doing something. You know when the browser is doing something, and you can actually start analyzing why it's doing it slow. We didn't have that functionality in the past. That's the really cool thing about new browsers as well. They're not like, haha, I don't tell you what's going on. They're like, okay, here's the stuff, here's your problem, here you can fix it. And Chrome is amazing at that, Firefox is amazing at that. It centralizes the visual. Change once, apply everywhere. When CSS came out, I was already web developer for 2 years, and I remember like doing table layouts and font tags and like background color on table cells and stuff like that. I was young. I was okay with pain. And then CSS came out, and I realized like, oh god, I've got these 4,000 pages, and I've got one document where I can change the colors for all of those. Boom! So much faster, so much better. This is cool. I'm going to support this. And then Netscape 6 came out, the first browser to do it properly. Opera did it really well as well, but all free users were not too excited about it. And I'm like, okay, I can use this now, and it's getting better and better. As a web developer, I'm so excited what we have nowadays. It results in overall smaller documents. You don't have to put the colors in, you don't have to put the fonts in, you have to basically put everything once and apply it. As a separation of concerns, it leaves the visuals to those who want them. That's another big thing. If you're a JavaScript developer and you want to make sure that people use your stuff, have all the styling in CSS, because you don't want to be the guy who styles it, because most of us don't have any fashion sense or know what colors go well together or fonts go well together. That's how you get websites like the British Embassy. Give it to the people that want to deal with it, and that's the very important part. And I think far too often we think we have to do everything ourselves because web technologies are so easy. Yeah, I know CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. I can do the whole thing myself. But if you start partnering with a designer or partnering with a developer as a designer, you actually build much, much more beautiful things. It eases the maintenance. It's much easier to change a color than to create lots of new images. That's a big thing as well. The amount of images we don't need to do nowadays any longer, because browsers render things like rounded corners and like gradients and these kind of things. It's incredible how much you can save. And every single image you put on the web is a liability. It slows down your website because it has to be loaded, it has to be found, the DNS lookup has to happen, and you actually have to get the image and start displaying it. It's very simple and powerful access to the document. jQuery was the massive success because it didn't go through the DOM. It didn't go the like document, get elements by tag name so-and-so, number 5, first child, this and that. It basically said like $.class so-and-so this. It went through the CSS selectors to access things in the document. And they're incredibly simple and incredibly powerful. And they're faster than anything you can do as well. The browser already does that for you. The browser does the CSS rendering and the rendering of the page when it's displaying it every 60 times a second. Totally fine to actually let him do that rather than writing it yourself. Of course, browser support issues are there. There's a great site called Can I Use? So anything you want to know about CSS, you can actually click on that one and it tells you which browser supports it and which browser doesn't. And this is kept up to date all the time. So if you wonder why something doesn't work, look it up there. There's also links to the resources, like explanations about the things, the specification, blog posts about it, the MDN article, and so on and so forth. It's like that's where you find information. The syntax is very different to programming languages. As a JavaScript developer going into CSS for the first time, you're like, what? Like, wait, exclamation mark important means important? No, in JavaScript that means not important. What are you doing to me here? Like CSS animations, it says 0% curly brace. Where's the colon? Oh no, it's not JSON, it's CSS. So the syntactic issues are much, much different. It's like a declarative language rather than a functional language. Specificity is not only hard to pronounce, but it's also tough to understand. This is the problem when you change the color and it doesn't do it, and you wonder why. And you basically then you put like lots and lots of selectors onto it, or an important at the end of it, so you get it blue. And then again, 2 months later, people come and slap you because they can't change the website any longer. Again, great thing that we have with developer tools nowadays, you can inspect the page, you can click on any element, and there you actually find out, okay, the full slide cover is where the Z index comes from. The fade full slide is where the other comes from. Oh, you have no idea of reading that. That's not good. Let's change the resolution. Stuff like that happens. Shout. Throw things at me. Make me suffer. Yeah, 100 Hertz is maybe a bit much. 60. There we go. Clever, Chris. Is that better? Slightly. Anyways, you get the style from the page and you know where it inherited from. And yeah, in old browsers, we did not have that. We basically had to wonder why it didn't do it and start commenting out in our CSS and commenting it again. And like nowadays, not a problem so much. Specificity basically means don't put in, too many things in your CSS. The longer your CSS selectors are, the harder it will be to overwrite them later on. IDs are a great idea to access things with JavaScript in CSS also, but they're basically the big jackhammer in the document, like, I'm an ID, nobody else is around to do anything here. So when people do something else, it will never be applied. Overly attached to a document. No reset is possible. That was a big problem in CSS as well. In the past, we built one web page. Awesome, make it colorful, make it beautiful, get lots of money, be successful. Then I used to work for Yahoo. I used to work on the Yahoo front page and build Yahoo Maps, or as a part of a team, of course, not me like, oh, you build Yahoo Maps. And the Yahoo front page is basically lots and lots of little different modules. And the different modules came from different parts of Yahoo, where like sports had a green color, cars had a blue color, the main page had a yellow color. Guess which color was applied to the modules when it went in there? All got yellow. So the department's like, oh, our branding is not yellow, so what can we do something about it? So we put like iframes in there, or all kind of dirty tricks, or put like massive change selectors with like 5 IDs around, 5 elements with IDs around them, so the CSS doesn't get overwritten. So, and scoping is coming in CSS, so we actually work around that, but the issue is still that once defined, it applies to everything, which is because it needs to render fast. It needs to be fast in the browser, but it's very annoying for me because I can't change it. Browser quirks, flash of unstyled contents in friends. Flash of unstyled content basically meant until the CSS has been loaded, you just see a white page with Times New Roman, and then like poof, all of a sudden it's pretty. Which is like, yeah, for developers, yeah, fuck it. For end users, they're like, oh my god, what happened? Is my computer wrong, or do I have a virus? Is something going wrong here? Like, you have to make the smooth way of doing it. And it's quite funny how you find out browser quirks just by chance at times. Like, Internet Explorer 6 and 7, I think, does not load more than 64 style sheets in the document. Now, no sane person would ever have 64 style sheets. We only found that out because Drupal, the content management system, had a theme CSS for every single widget you used on the page. So when you had 64 widgets, you had like 64 style sheets. And all the other widgets that came in didn't have any styling anymore. And it took people ages to find out why that is. And it's a magical memory thing in Internet Explorer 6 that says like, 64 is enough. You don't do any styling anymore. That's it. And the other thing was like Internet Explorer as well had the... you could not style something until it has layout. And that was basically, you had to trigger that with giving it a width, or with giving it a set index, or giving it a zoom of 1. And that never got out because tables already have has layout. So when we had table layout, no problem, everything was styled. Later on, like when we started doing the right thing and not use tables for layout, all of a sudden everything was broken. That's the kind of knowledge that accumulated over 15 years that I don't want to have. Or I don't need to have anymore because browsers don't do this stuff any longer. Of course, there's browser quirks still, but iOS 7 just came out with lots and lots of strange things in Safari. But the good thing is they get fixed nowadays, and it's not like you have to wait for the next operating system to get a better browser. And that's a really good thing that we have now. There's hundreds of best practices. If you look out for CSS and learn like, what is the best way to do CSS3? You find a lot of information and a lot of people's personal information and personal ideas. They're not necessarily a best practice. Best practices are not defined. Best practices are found. If somebody tells you, I just came up with this is a best practice, liar. This is basically saying like, how is it a best practice if you haven't tested it in lots and lots of different environments? How is it a best practice if you don't know if it works in other languages, for example? I built Visit Britain in 37 languages. The amount of stuff that I learned with Arabic and Hebrew, with that how browsers break, was gorgeous. And yeah, good fun. So what's the dangers when dealing with CSS? Where does it all get entangled? How come CSS is so hard to maintain? Because you always get these CSS files, and when you want to change something, everything else breaks. Or you have to put like something at the end of it. You don't know where things come from. It's not documented. It's just a big, big mess. Well, the first is called pestering the elderly, which is like, let's try to give it to the old browsers that don't understand it. We talked about this quickly, like, let it go. Like, Internet Explorer 6 is old. Just let it go in the park, feed the ducks, have fun. Don't go into it and say like, hey, let's run around and have some sports. That's what basically we do with animations and with transitions. That browser should not have to do that any longer. The other big problem is browser favoritism. You see this a lot on the web. And this is the reason why Opera had to start rendering things that WebKit does. And because developers are lazy. And this is terrible because on a non-WebKit browser, on not Chrome, on not Safari, this is a white button with a white background. Which is, of course, yeah, oh, it's gamification. People have to find the information or whatever. No, it's a bug. It's a terrible, terrible bug, and especially on mobile, that was the biggest problem. Every HTML5 mobile app I worked with had this kind of, and when better platforms on mobile came out, phone, and that's a very, very simple way to work around. This is background green works in Netscape 4, Explorer 5, I think. Then you do WebKit linear gradient. That's for WebKit, and then you do linear gradient for browsers. So this works anytime you do, because if it's a legacy browser, background green. If it's Safari or if it's Chrome, WebKit linear gradient. If that is an error, it goes to the next one and says linear gradient. Awesome. Every browser gets something. It's a green button, or it's a green button with a gradient on it. You did not build something that breaks, and that's a very, very important bit to do. Another bit is chasing the misguided dream that I talked about. My website has to look the same everywhere. Go for it. And that's not all devices out there that people are using to go online. I've seen internet cafes here. Anything that can be connected to a cable, people will show it to you. Like, I was amazed I didn't see green monitors and stuff. But this is cool. This is what the web is for. The web was defined, and that's why I dedicated my work life to it, to be a channel for everybody, to reach everybody. Anybody with an HTTP connection and some computing device that can display HTML can be part of the internet. And they have a form field where they can type something in, can send emails and become a publisher, become a maker, become a creator. And it should not be that you have to have an iPhone to become a creator. It has to be that whatever happens out there, you get something that works. Not the most beautiful, not the most amazing thing, but something that works. And this is the only thing we can give to people. Going up to a client and telling them it's going to look the same everywhere. No. Even when if you released your website as an image, even then there's color differences between different browsers. So it looking the same everywhere, working the same everywhere, forget about this. And a great way is if you get your hands on a mobile device and you have these users that basically say like, oh, it should look like this on my computer. That's what the internet is, and like, this is what it looks like. Do you see how many people are running around there with phones? Wouldn't it be good if they could use our website to find that restaurant? Restaurant websites are my favorite. What do I want from a restaurant website? The friggin' address and the telephone number, not more. I know already that I want to go there. I don't need to see pictures of your interior and the background music and a dancing monkey or whatever you want to show me. I just want to know where the thing is, and I want to have a clickable link so I can call you. How many websites have a tell link on their telephone number? Not many. Most of them are just like, oh, we need some brochure on the web. So make sure that we support all of this with the right format. And the great thing about web technology is that they're built progressively. You can do something for a Nokia Asha, and you can give something to a quad-core MacBook Pro at the same time. If the experience is the same on both, you're either overloading one user or you're actually disappointing another. And most of the time we don't do the disappointing, so we just don't care about the people with the Asha. But I'm on a bad hotel connection here with a really good piece of hardware, so I feel like I'm back in 1997 at times. I just have to reload 3 times to get the DNS. So let's take a look at what we can do in CSS that you probably have used already. but quite don't know about yet. So how many of you use CSS3 daily? And very firm in it, know stuff about it? How many would love to use it more, but are afraid of it? Good, mixture of everything. Great selector support. First thing that people just don't know yet, that okay, I have to put a class on everything because then I can put dot thing in my CSS to style it. Your CSS structure, your HTML structure can already help you to do a lot of cool stuff with it. So this, for example, is an input here, and this has a padding of 5 pixels, font size 2 REM. REM is basically like EM, but it doesn't inherit from the other. So it's actually to the core, to the base of the page. So it will not resize if you start nesting them. It's a really nice way of defining font sizes. It has an input of background yellow. HTML. Yeah. Bit of a like, who styles HTML except for height 100%? So we do all the time. And here I've got an input button that is a type of submit, because if I make it a type of submit, that form becomes keyboard accessible, and I can actually send it off by pressing enter, and it is a submit button. It's not a div with a class and then a jQuery thing that makes it a submit button. It's a submit button. So all I have to do is input type equals submit, and I get the background to green. Or I can set the background to blue. Or I can set the color to white. I didn't have to put a class on it. I didn't have to put it in another element. I just do the selector of type equals submit. If I were to change that to any other type, then it doesn't actually get it there. Then this one here is actually after the form, and I do this with the input type submit. So this is the input type of submit, and what is following it with that tilde thing? That P should be the color of 999 or 000, or it should be font size, make it smaller, .8 EM, make it smaller. Again, I didn't have to put a class on that. It was just a paragraph that follows that form field. As I've got this tilde selector that I probably didn't know about, it actually works. And form fields can be styled nowadays. People are very afraid of styling form fields because, oh, in the past they couldn't be styled. Browsers do it. I don't want to have a border on this one. Turn off the border. Border none. Give it rounded corners to make it Web 2.0. Border radius 5 pixels. Make it 10 pixels so we see it. And make it a background of black so we see it as well. Simple. All buttons have rounded corners now. You didn't need to create an image in Photoshop. You didn't have to optimize. You didn't have to put it on your server. It's done. You can then have activity things, like if you say input focus, you can style something different. Let's try that out. Input focus. I think it's focus. Background green. And I got a green focus. Didn't have to write JavaScript for that, didn't have to do anything with it. All these things are in the browser for me. And they don't cost you anything, they're just very simple to do. Can anybody guess how this inline editor works? Yes. It's a wonderful little trick. Just put a style tag in the document itself, display it to block, put content editable on there, and you got a live editor. Don't need to download anything, don't need to make anything special. Sometimes quirky, because like copy and paste into that will always break. But it's a good thing to do. Length units. Some of them are dynamic. So these are lots and lots of units that you can play with. Percentage, pixels, EM, REM, VW, VH, Vmin, Vmax, inches, centimeter, millimeter, point, pica, X is something else, and CH. The only ones that are known, I guess, are pixel, percentage, and EM. VW and VH is really, really cool, because that's a percentage of the size of the screen. So you can resize the font by resizing the page that way. So you could define as like 1.2 VW in a document. Well, let's do that quickly, actually, to see that I'm not talking nonsense here. we have online connectivity? Awesome. So let's do CSS here and say like P font size 1.2 BW, and then we see P hello, and close it. And that's basically, as the screen is very, very small, our font is very, very small. If I make this bigger now, it should do something. Might be JS Fiddle not applying it. But you see that basically the more I resize my thing, the larger the font gets and the smaller the font gets as well. Before that, we had only that in Flash. That was no way of doing that in CSS. Well, in JavaScript, you could read the width of the document and then to re-render all the font sizes or create a script file. But now the browser does it. I mean, if you do like the VH, that should be also as well, because the height doesn't change much. The height doesn't change much, but if you change the height to something much, much smaller. Oh, this is fun in OS X. You see now the font resizes with the height of the window. And this is something really cool when you do a mobile app, for example, because you want to make sure that the font is readable on a 320 device and on a 960 device and a 480 device, but you don't want to have a style sheet for each of them, so you can use VW and VH for doing that. Vmin and Vmax actually means that you can pack them in and say like this is the biggest it should get and this is the smallest it should get. Because on a 42-inch TV set, I don't want a font this big. I still want a font about this size. So you can actually limit it to that way. Pseudo selectors are another big thing as well. Link, hover, visited, active is probably the most known one. Like, because the first time we did CSS, what did we do? We did a link, and when you hovered over it, we took off the line with the text decoration. That was the coolest thing back then. We got focus, we got target, we've got root, we've got only child, empty, nth child, last child, first of type, last of child, end child, blah. This is jQuery really in a nutshell. With this, you can access almost everything in the document, and you can do incredibly powerful things. So if you take a look at this one here, for example, I got a children, first child, and this is the green one now. If I change that to last child, then I can do actually the last child on the last one. If I do it to nth child, nth child even, then I can actually put it this way. I can put another line in there. Oh, let's try that with copy and paste. See? When you want to style the other ones, just do it like this, background green. Because the specificity of the nth child is higher than the other one, I can even define the background color of the li after that. Not a problem at all. I can then say nth child, the third one, or I can say the 8th one. This starts counting at 1 because it's written for humans, not computers. As a program, it drives me nuts because I always do nth child 0 and wonder why it doesn't work. Because that's how arrays start, right? So I got the 5, and then you also have the 5 plus 1, the nth child 2n plus 1, or 2n, which is every second one, which is the same as odd and even, but then you can also change it to 3n, or you can change it to 4n. And the great thing is, you don't need to know the amount of nodes. If you do that in JavaScript, you have in your loop, you have to check that there are enough, or that the array hasn't come to an end, or you have to do a callback handler on each of them with a recursive function. In CSS, it does that for me, just with this admittedly messed up syntax, but actually it works. So, and this is something that designers and developers can do themselves. You don't have to actually pester them. Like, okay, you style whatever you want, you got the CSS power to do it. And if every second row of a table is not gray and the other one is white in Internet Explorer 6, nobody's going to die of that. It just means that you didn't write a JavaScript to go through every table or put a class on every second row that you didn't need to have. Typography and fonts, I mean, this has been done to death by now. So you can add with add font face. You can put TTFs into the document. So we finally have whatever font you want to have on the web. In the past, I always loved it when people came up to me, when companies came up, like in 2003, 2004. It's like, oh, we've got this company font. We want our website to be in that company font, which I didn't even have the license for using that font. I didn't have a way to use it on the web because web fonts came out. The first ones were 2007, I think. And the best way around that was, as I knew that everybody in that company has that font installed, I just used it as the first font face in my CSS. Outside of the company, nobody ever saw the font, but the CEO or the project manager that signed off my contract was the one that used the company only, the computer only in the company. So for him, it always looked right. For end users out there, they didn't care and didn't want to download an extra font. I think it's very important to understand as well that when we optimize a lot of stuff on the web, and then we put like 500 fonts in our page and wonder why it's slow, it's a very bad thing as well. So another thing that I encountered the other day on the T-Mobile sign-up page, the mobile sign-up page that was on a slow connection, it took me like 20 seconds to be able to read it because it didn't have any font in there, like an Arial or something like that, but I just waited until the font has loaded. So don't completely rely on that font to be loaded before you actually show something, because otherwise you might have an interface that's completely broken. Actually, the font loader from Google is really cool about this. Font loader, Google. The web font loader. Because what you have with that one is you have a JavaScript handle on applying fonts. So on GitHub. Even they gave up on Google Docs, Google Code, so that's good. So what that one actually does is gives you a JavaScript way to access web fonts. So you can actually say the type ID of the web font is this one. Then you create a script load, and that one actually puts the web font in there. So this is all asynchronous as well, so it doesn't stop the page from rendering. And then you have events. So you can basically say loading inactive, font loading, font active, font inactive. And you can use these classes in your CSS. So you can say like body font is Arial, body loading, font is already a different size, because different fonts might have different sizes. So a lot of people include a font that looks great at 300 pixels, and when it displays at in Times New Roman on my page, not so great. So make sure that you only change the font sizes accordingly when you actually have been loading the fonts. Yes. Yes. The way to do that is basically, if you're on a fast connection, you don't see it at all. You do a flash of unstyled content now already anyways with that. Like there's no way around waiting until the font has been loaded. The Financial Times, for example, hosts their fonts in local storage to avoid that. That's one way of doing it, which again is annoying because local storage is asynchronous. It's asynchronous, so it loads all the fonts and then renders the page. So your page loading time takes longer. But even things like Smashing Magazine fascinates me all the time. Like when I load this, it takes quite a while for the font to show up. You take a look at that? And now the font is there. So we have that problem already. So it's better maybe to have a fallback that works, a font that shows. I don't know. It's it's a discussion between you and your designer. It's like, who do you want to make happy, your designer or end users on a slow connection? So that's always the question that we have to deal with ourselves. It's the same with Retina images. Like, oh, I've got an iPad 2. I want a 60 megapixel image on there because that's awesome. And I'm like, yeah, on my Nexus 4, thank you, because I only pay for traffic on my SIM card, right? So, but yeah, these minimalistic things and user testing is a big question there. The other way around that would be also to have a low version, to say like that does that checking and the other one. But the biggest problem we have on the web right now is there's no way of testing the speed of a connection. I can send a cookie and find out how long that took, but it doesn't make a difference because the connection might be good now, next second the DNS server is down. So connections change every second, so it's really hard to detect what people have. And sometimes it's just you have to go with the level of least resistance and hope it works. Media queries, super, super cool. And please use them for everything that you do. Media queries do one thing. They actually define that the CSS, the sidebar here, for example, only gets applied when the screen is a minimum width of 700 pixels and in the orientation of landscape. This is simple. Doing the same thing in JavaScript, not so simple. You can use window inner width and then window inner height and see like if one is the bigger than the other and so on and so forth, and hope that the browser gives you that information on a mobile device. In CSS, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, not a problem. It's still the layout should work. So the other really good thing about media queries, Internet Explorer 8 does not support them. So whatever fancy HTML, CSS you have, just put it into Add Media Screen and put it in that block. You know for a fact it will never be applied to old browsers, so you don't have to test it, because it basically is blocked out from them. It's like doing a window add event listener around your JavaScript. That means that Internet Explorer 6, 7, and 8 will never get that JavaScript code. And why not? It shouldn't get it if it can't stomach it. So make sure that you only send things to the right environment, and this is what you do with media queries. There's lots of information about media queries. There's lots of showcases. There's one on that on MEDIAQUERIES, where you can always see like, oh, what do people do with media queries? And it's beautiful. It just means that you can support all the people out there. Just don't forget that with media queries, you hide and show things. If you've got a 4 megabyte page with like 4 megabyte of images and you resize it to a usable interface of 320 pixels, that's great, but you still downloaded 4 megabyte that you never used. So thinking about media queries as like loading content only once it really has the size of that thing is another very important part. This is actually in JavaScript, you have that as well, and it's called Match Media. And lots of people don't know about this or haven't used it yet. So you can use the same media query syntax in something called Match Media, and then you can load content on demand. So this is basically a thing that I wrote for the Firefox OS for the Hacks blog that shows you how to use that. Because my problem was that no, that's Robert's talk actually. Loading on demand. Oh, I wished I would bookmark my own stuff from time to time. Okay, we will find that later. What you can do with Match Media is basically say like only create a CSS when the Match Media can be done. Because in the link element of CSS you can actually put media queries and say like this CSS only applies to this size. Problem is that browsers all load all style sheets and all the background images and everything in every style sheet. That's by default. That's actually defined in the standard that browsers should do this. I find it hard because we don't need it, so why should I actually display it? But with Match Media you can actually work around that. Now gradients are a beautiful thing. Not necessarily this gradient, but in CSS it's just now I can change this from hot pink to goldenrod, from hot pink to coffee. Ugh, what am I doing? Hot pink to coffee. And then I got a light green one, or I can change it to black. And I can change it to all kind of things. I can have stops, I can have color stops, I can make rainbow colors with this. People go nuts with CSS gradients. And the great thing about that one is that the browser paints them for me. Because one big issue is in Photoshop, gradients are looking beautiful, but optimizing them is absolutely horrible. So if I do a gradient here now, for example, oh yeah, that's a beautiful one, and I save that for web now, I either have it as a GIF, and then I don't have all the colors, and I've got all these, probably not visible on that screen, but it's like, it's not smooth. It has all the things in there, and it's still 450K here. If I do it as JPEG or as PNG 8, I got the same color problem. If I do it as JPEG, I've got the artifacts, like the blurry little things in it. And if I do it as PNG 24, I'm actually up to, how much do I have here? Wow, even my computer has a problem with that. A big problem with that. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. But the problem is that a gradient, if you look at it from a byte level, is just completely different data, every single byte. So no packing algorithm can do anything with that. So no matter how you try to optimize it, so 1.4 meg as a background image, probably not a good idea to put on the web. A CSS gradient, probably a good idea. But be aware that also gradients are still heavy. So if you put gradients and drop shadows on things that you move around a lot, the browser will have to do a lot of work. So if you move things, maybe during the move, remove the drop shadows and remove the scrolling. Then actually you have a much better performance, or change or hide the things that have drop shadows on them. Any drag and drop is always a big problem. The more elements you have in that, the more DOM elements you have in your drag element, the slower it will get. So it's sometimes a good idea to hide the original element and just do an outline or something and then show it and copy it over in one go, rather than copying it over while you're moving the mouse, because you're changing it so often that the browser has to keep painting and painting and painting. They of course go to right, they go to top, or they actually go in degrees. And you can do all kind of beautiful things with it. They're different from browser to browser, sadly enough. Firefox has had it for a long time now to be unprefixed. The WebKit prefix, the first one, was completely different. Then Mozilla proposed this one, and the W3C agreed to make this one the standard one. And now there's lots of old WebKit things out there. In the end, I guess you will do something like that button maker stuff and look for those. That's what I always do when I want to make things look pretty. That's the Colorzilla one. Gradient editor, that is pretty awesome. So this one, actually you can define here the button that you want to have, and it creates the CSS for you. And it has all kind of cool color schemes and like blue and green and stuff in here. And you can actually create them as well and paint with them. And you just copy and paste that. And it has IE9 support as well if you wanted to, but don't do that. IE9 gets supported with Internet Explorer expressions and filters, and that's basically running ActiveX in your page. Not fun. Big security hole, big annoyance, radioactive X as I keep calling it. And you can actually change the orientation and all kind of stuff as well. So if you don't want to understand what's going on there, just copy and paste that and be happy with it as well. Again, if you move stuff around a lot, don't put many gradients on it, because it is a lot of stuff that the browser has to do. Shadows, another big thing. So the box shadow is horizontal, vertical, blur, spread, color, inset. So if I change this one now at the end here to inset, then I get the shadow inside the box rather than outside the box. If I change that to 14 pixels on this side, if I change it to 24 on the top side, then I get a much bigger shadow here. If I change that to blue, I can actually change it to blue, and so on and so forth. You can use shadows also to create outlines simply, for example. That is not that easy with border. And you can use shadows to give the things depth. And now that we changed to like flat design, probably it's the end of shadows. But it's also cool to do like hover things, like shadow hover. I can do a box shadow of like 4 pixels, 10 pixels, 10 pixels, 2 pixels, 3, 6, 9. And if I now move over that, I get a different shadow, and I get the idea that I pressed a button or something like that. So a little bit of interactivity is very easily done with that. Of course, that looks crap right now because there's actually no transition. But if you just say a transition of 0.2 seconds, then it's actually smoothly doing it. Don't need jQuery for that, don't need Flash for that. We have it in the browser, it does these things for us. Use that stuff, it's beautiful. Transition is gorgeous because I don't need to know the end state and the beginning state. I just say, go from this to this. Do all the calculations in between. I don't have to calculate what is the best path between 2 points. You can do that for me. Yeah. Hmm.
Like in modal windows, if you have this background color
Yeah.
black, big empty div, right? So is it recommended to use modal windows for that?
You can, but if it's on a mobile device, the performance might not be good because it's a huge shadow that it has to calculate. If all you have to do is gray out the page, then I would normally do it with generating a pseudo element after the box and then style that one. So I would do something like on the P here, for example, I would say P after, and then I say content is nothing, and background is black, and position is absolute, and top is 0, left is 0, right is 0, and bottom is 0. And then I got a full screen thing going on here. And if I put the set index of lower than the P, it should be behind it. Or not. Huh? Huh? I said the what to the P? Oh, well, still doesn't do it. Okay, but this is basically one way I would do these kind of stuff. Why do I do it before? Is it because I gave it a set index? Okay, that's something you can try out yourself later. But in general, if it's something like a layover or something that is only visual, creating after and before makes much more sense than having a div in the page. Because it's something that only makes sense when it's visual. The only problem with that is like if you try to animate that, it only works in Firefox and I think Internet Explorer. But Safari does not animate generated content yet, but this will come in the future as well. So I think it makes most sense to when something is huge, not to use a shadow and not to use gradients, but actually use an opacity instead and with a full element. And yeah, basically an opacity change means it creates a new layer rendering in the browser, but with drop shadow and with gradient, you also have to calculate the gradient and the shadow. And that's the main header there. My favorite was Internet Explorer. I love Microsoft to bits. I have a lot of good friends here, but their marketing department, I think, should sometimes be strangled. Because you do these browser comparison things that show off which browser is the best, which is like every 2 months or so they have to do it for shareholders or something, because end users really don't care. And they had this particle system where they showed how many particles can be animated in different browsers. And Internet Explorer 10 was about 20% faster than any other browser. Like faster than Chrome on Windows, faster than Chrome on Mac, faster than Safari on Mac. And we were like, this is weird. So we looked into the source code, and the source code had a background gradient that actually painted from white to FFE. So not quite discernible with the human eye that there is a gradient going on. And every second it would switch the gradient around. There's no way people can tell me that there is a reasonable explanation why you would put something into a page. The reason is that Internet Explorer caches gradients. Others don't. So basically Chrome and others had to recalculate the whole screen every single time. Internet Explorer was like, meh, I've got a gradient, I know that one already, that's totally fine. So, and I mean, like, if you cheat that much, at least hide that code somewhere and don't call it gradient switcher. Like, we're just doing a profiling of the page. Like, what's this gradient switcher thing? Oh, now we know. I mean, I would have put that inside an image in a PNG and read it out via Canvas and evaled that code or something. Try to hide it somewhere, be sneaky about it, but not call it gradient switcher. Probably the developer itself was embarrassed about it, like, oh, I have to do this. Let's make it really easy to trace that we cheated. And it's funny because when you call Microsoft out on that on Twitter, they actually thank you for it as well. Like, oh yeah, well, do you want to speak at our conference? Because obviously you know what we're doing wrong. And you're like, yeah. Transforms, awesome. Transforming things means you have full control over how it changes. Transforming is also part of the flow of the browser. So, if I transform something by saying translate 40-50, it shifts it 50-40. If I rotate it, I can rotate it. If I do that with top and left and position absolute, it's not part of the flow. It's not hardware accelerated. It basically means that I tell the browser like, hey, you're rendering, no, I want this on the top. Oh, by the way, you just started rendering again, I want this on the left as well. If I do a transform, it analyzes the transform string, does all the transformations, and then shows it. So it's a much, much better use of the capacity of the browser. It's much, much more performant, and it's much, much more flexible for you as a developer as well. So if I wanted to do this bumblebee here, of course I could just say position absolute, top 20 pixels, left 100 pixels. I guess I'm inside another element or something like that. That's why it doesn't do it properly like I expect it to do. But fair enough. No, actually it works. And what do I do now if I want to rotate it? I have to put a transform on it. So I might as well start with a transform. So if I do a transform and say like transform translate 20-100, I get the same functionality. So, but it's part of the flow. And if I want to rotate this now, all I have to do is like rotate to 45 degrees or 30 degrees or whatever you want to do. So I've got all the cool stuff that I used to have with Flash only or with other technology only, and this one is now in the browser. And then I say scale to 2, or scale to 2 and the other one to 1.5. So I can do all kind of visual transformations on this element itself, and it's part of the flow. So if you get a chance to do transform instead of position absolute, please do that. Also, if you have to go with top and left and styling and rotating, do it once. Don't do jQuery so-and-so top style CSS, no, CSS top this, CSS left this. Because the browser, every time it says like, okay, I gotta go to the document, find this thing. Okay, I go to its style collection, change that. I go to the document, find this thing. I go to the style collection, change that. You're interrupting the browser continuously while it's trying to tell a story. Whereas with transform and translate and general transforms, you have all kind of things like that. I never understood what SKU is about. Like, why would you do that? It never looks good. But it's basically like shifting it a bit. It's just kind of weird. Like people used to simulate 3D things with SKU as well, like make boxes and stuff. But we don't need that anymore because as Bumblebee is a transformer, Optimus Prime is a better transformer, which actually transforms in 3D. So in this case, I got my perspective. The perspective says, how far away from the screen are you? How many pixels are between you and the screen that you could position things in? This is what the perspective says. Preserve 3D means like make that 3D. If you turn off preserve 3D, then it's just a flat thing. Oh, it's actually by default. Transform style, is it none? Doesn't matter. Preserve. Yeah, doesn't do it anyways. If I get a smaller one, then I actually get deeper into the thing. If I do a larger one, I get closer to me. And then I have this transform rotate 50 degrees, scale 2, and rotate Z in 20 degrees. When I started with 3D transformations, I was like, oh my god, I will never understand that. What is the X, what is the Y, what is the Z coordinate? I used to do like 3D game writing in assembler language on Commodore 64 and stuff, and all we did was like depth of field. We didn't have any set X, Y, we just simulated it somehow. So every time I have a problem with that, I actually write myself a little tool. And this is the CSS 3D tester. Dum dum dum. This is what it looks like. So I basically have got myself a little animation that shows me the Z, the X, and the Y coordinates, and the preserved 3D, as you can see here. If I turn the preserved 3D, then it doesn't do the translation into 3D space at all. So why that's turn offable, I really don't know. But if you go, for example, to perspective here, then you will see that a larger perspective gives you a much bigger space to play. A smaller perspective makes you a much bigger space to play with. So 800 to 1000 always looks the best. You can then see the different angles. So I know now Y is the one that goes up. I know X is the one that goes back. And I know Z is the one that actually goes into the depth of the screen. And I have these coordinates as well of the cube itself, so I can shift that one around to like 40, and then you see it's a bit off to the center, or I can leave it at 0, and they can rotate it as well to say like 30 degrees, give it 40 degrees here, and give it a set degree of like 20, and then you can see the whole space there. You can turn off the front logo, you can turn off the back logo, you can actually shift that off as well. So I've got a set index of 100 here. If I do that to 40, it gets closer to the main plane. And once I'm happy with that, and I want to see like, okay, I only want to have the one logo, and I want to have it in the background here, but this is like 0 here rather than rotated 180 degrees to the back. I've got my copy and paste my CSS here, or I can say create full page, and that one gives me an HTML document that has that CSS in it that you can start playing with. 3D transformations sometimes, like, why would I use that? But you can make nice and subtle effects with that. Another big trick you hear continuously is like, do 3D transformation on anything, because then Safari WebKit will do it hardware accelerated. If you don't do a set transformation, the hardware acceleration doesn't kick in. It's true in older Safari, that is the problem, and I think in the last one as well. In Chrome it also helped as well. In Firefox, on Android, it actually can make your things slower. Because when you create a set transition, when you put something onto the set, it creates a new rendering layer in Firefox on Android. It doesn't need a new frame inside the main rendering. So you don't do anything with that frame, you actually use up more memory. So there's a bit of a problem with that, and there's lots and lots of tricks that say like, do this, everything works, keep up to date. Hacks have a problem of biting you in the bum like a few months down the line. So make sure that you don't trust everything because it's, oh, somebody from Google said this is how to do it. Somebody from Mozilla said that's how to do it. Engineers like to actually find quick solutions for things, and we're very bad at admitting 2 months later that we were wrong. So a lot of documentation is out there that is actually outdated, but still does the trick out there. So, transitions, I showed before, is for me the coolest thing ever, because making things look smooth just by putting a line of CSS in it is just gorgeous. I shift on that one to white, and I didn't have to calculate the color changes. I didn't have to do anything with that. I can make it actually 5 seconds or 4 seconds, so it does it slowly, or I can change the background to blue, and I can change from one to the other. I can play around with this for hours. And I do. That's actually a real problem. If you start writing CSS transitions, you sit in front of you and go, ooh. And you realize like 4 o'clock, like, nah, fuck it, ooh. This is amazing. I love doing that. Because everything looks so smooth and beautiful out of a sudden. It's like when you start your new phone for the first time and haven't let it run for a week. Everything's like, oh. And then like, oh, I don't have any memory anymore. So I get a lot of questions how that's done on my blog when people are like, this sidebar here. They're like, see this? It's just a 3D transformation of 20 degrees and a hover going back to 0. I was bored. But I get so many emails of people like, oh, this is the coolest design ever. And I'm like, nah, not really. But like, it just shows that you can do these things. And for me, it was exciting that I can change live HTML code and tilt it in space. Because before that, I had to generate an image for that. Or I had to paint an image in Canvas. So nowadays, you can do that with editable CSS. And that's just beautiful. So transitions are great because they go from one state to the other, and you don't need to know the states. The problem is you don't have much control over which things are actually transitioned. You can say only transition a few or only all of them, but you cannot say like do it in a certain way. They will always be in the same speed and with a certain easing that you define. So you actually have this transition 4 seconds, and by definition it's ease in. So it starts slower, then happens and ends slower, because that's how the world works. In computing we always have like one state to the other. Whereas if I roll a ball on a table, it doesn't go to the end and stops there. It rolls and gets slower. And this is what easing does. The easing functions that we have in these basically say ease in, ease out, or bounce, or whatever you have as well. Is bounce even supported any longer? I hope not. No, it is. There you go. Now it actually bounces. And ease in only. So this one would start slower and then actually end abruptly. And now goes to blue. So these are all defined as Bezier functions. So they can be you can use the built-in ones, or you can build your own easing functions as well. There's a great thing by Leroux called Bezier curves, I think. Let's see if I find it. And that one allows you to actually cubic Bezier. And that was really cool to actually just play with Bezier, and you can see what they look like. So you can see now this one works like that. If I start putting that like this, I can see what it looks like. And then I just generate my code from that. So that's pretty cool. Fun thing is Bezier curves come from, you know where they came from? Who came up with the first one to do that? Car manufacturing. You know, sports cars in the 60s that have these wonderful curves, actually is that kind of mathematics behind it. That's when they started finding out how to do it. The simplest way to do an easing is just do a percentage. So instead of going from 0 to 1, you go from 0 from 0.1 divided by 100, 0.2 divided by 100, and so on and so forth. So that way you get a nice little curve. But we don't need to calculate all of this stuff anymore because browsers come with it. So you can define this in transitions, but it doesn't give you the power that animations have. Animations mean you define what you want to animate and where you want to go. You don't just go from one state to another, but you define all the steps that you have. So you have like 0%, 50%, 100%, or you can actually go 10% and or from to and from. The syntax is painful at times, but it's incredibly powerful what you can use animations for. And also you got step animations, so instead of having it as smoothly, it does it in like 5 steps, so you can do counters with that and all kind of stuff. Animations, transitions are both a wonderful idea because they are hardware accelerated. They do the thing in the browser while the browser is doing its things, and you can make things flashy. Again, do you want to make it flashy, or can you overload the user? It's a matter of like making it tasteful and making it useful. Just because you can animate everything doesn't mean you should, and especially not in old browsers that actually are very bad at animating. So there's these great things like code drops, like every day there's something cool there. I saw this loading effects yesterday, and that one has a lot of animations that show you how to do a loading effect on the page. And all of these are basically CSS. You can see the thing up there that is an animation. You can actually fill from the left in the background. You have a 3D bars, or you got a pi timer. There you go. And these are all CSS animations, and you don't have to know what the browser is doing and don't have to worry about the performance because it just makes it part of it. I'm not sure how browsers are doing it, that actually, but I think if Chrome and Firefox drops with a certain frame rate, it actually stops the animation and goes to the end of it. So you don't have that problem that the animation gets stuck. It basically ends it. You also have JavaScript callbacks for all animations and transitions. So you know when the animation has finished, or when the animation is happening, or when the animation started. So instead of having to have your own timer and do a set timeout and calculate all kind of things, you basically just set an event handler at the end of it, and then you're fine and you can do something else. So if you want to know that the animation has stopped and then hide other things, you don't have to use jQuery for that. You can just do an add event listener on transition end on the document. And in the transition, it will tell you, in the transition event, it will tell you the name of the transition that ended. So by that, you can do a switch statement for all the different events that you had, all the transitions and animations that you had, and deal accordingly with them. It's a very simple way to do an interface and to make it perform as well. I've got lots of stuff open here. No? Yes. Flexbox is where it gets really cool. Now, this is still in flux. Different browser makers disagree how it's done. The W3C is leaning back and saying, like, you guys fight it out. We're going to find it sooner or later. But Flexbox is actually the first time that we have a chance to do proper layouting in CSS. Everything else we're doing right now is a hack. Absolute positioning is a hack. Floating is a hack. None of these things were meant to do layout. None of them were a box model like you would have in Java or in Flash or all the other graphical interfaces out there. So with Flex, I've got these two elements in here, these three elements in here, and I display them as MOSBox, which is the outer box here. 100 width of that, 100 pixel high. Let's make it 150 pixels high to see. No, there was a reason why it was 100 pixels high. And a background so you can see the box, but doesn't need to. So the MOSBox pack is start. If I want to move all of them to the end, I actually have to put it to the end. There's no floating on those, there's no positioning on those. These are just inline elements. So I don't need to change the floating of those and do a clearing on the last one. This is already done for the browser by me. So if I say center, I center them in the document. This is for navigation bars, absolutely amazing. And as we saw earlier, if you mix that with last child and first child, you can make the rounded corners on the navigation bar, and you can put like little bars between each LI element easily with a CSS selector. MOSBox align start is basically the vertical line, so you can say start or end, or if you don't give it a value, it would fill the space of the parent element. Another one, like making columns that are the same height without knowing the content. There's about 60 different ways to do that in CSS, 50 different hacks what you do that. My favorite was like making them huge and then do overflow hidden, and doing a JavaScript that reads all the heights and then aligns them accordingly. That's what I did in my JavaScript book in 2006, because it was the only way of doing it except for using a table. So this is the kind of stuff that will finally make Java people stop doing table layouts. Because on Stack Overflow, you always find that, oh, CSS is hard, I'm using a layout table because that works. You're like, yeah, same way a donkey works, but a car is better. So it's a bad idea to do these nowadays. The other thing, of course, is you have the LI here, Lime, and the MOSBox Flex 1. So if I uncomment that, they use up this whole space as well. I don't need to calculate spaces. I don't need 30%, 20%. I don't need to write a SAS plugin that does like something times 4 and these kind of things. It automatically finds the space and says that's enough. Not cool enough though. What if I want to have the middle one bigger than the others? The way to do that is then MOSBox Flex on one of them, and you can see again I use nth child here without having to set a class on it. And then I can say MOSBox Flex 5, and out of a sudden this one takes 5, the other one take 1. It calculates the percentages automatically for you. And this is just superb. And the cool thing is, like on mobile devices, this stuff is supported. On desktop, yeah, still getting there. Let's take a look at can I use Flexbox? What's going on right now? There's also a problem that Flexbox used to be a Zool thing, like the XML language that Firefox is written in. And then there became a standard called Flexbox. So we got like lots of documentation going left, right, and center. And the Flexbox of Zool was rather powerful, but cannot be completely converted. So IE 10, yay, with an MS prefix. Firefox 23, Chrome 29, Safari 6 with WebKit prefix, Opera 16, iOS, Opera Mini. You can use it, as you can see right now. Needs a bit of prefixing, but that can be done easily. But it's actually there, and you probably have never thought that you should use it, but I've seen a lot of people that do it. We actually did Flexbox rather late compared to the others, and because we just were testing it much heavily and what can be done, and we want to make sure that we don't forget all the things that we had in Flexbox for Zool. The reason why we did it was basically Fastbook. When Sencha did that Fastbook demo that showed them that you can write an HTML5 version of Facebook that is as fast as the Facebook native app, it didn't work in Firefox. And when that happens, then I'm on Twitter and I talk to you. And I talked to Sencha about this. Then they invited me to speak at their conference and gave me a job offer, which I didn't take. But they actually said the problem that we had with Fastbook, and they showed here that it actually is as fast as the native one, was that Firefox didn't do Flexbox, so that gave us a reason to do Flexbox. We had real engineers tell us what the problem was. So we said like, okay, we fix it with you then. Well, that's beautiful. And we sorted it out, and now we've got it in there, and we learned from it. So complaining about browsers on Twitter doesn't help anybody. Talking to the browser makers and giving them a real demo why it's broken and why you need it, that helps us. So please go to Bugzilla, talk to people, talk to us, talk to Chrome, talk to Safari, talk to Internet Explorer. Make browsers better, and browsers only get better when we know what engineers need to have. Otherwise, we start to simulate what engineers need to have or come up with random stuff that engineers might want to have. Like the MIDI interface that Chrome has right now. I'm still wondering how many people will use MIDI with their computer. But it's something that, yeah, it's cool to do. So Moz ordinal group is another one as well. So I've got 1, 2, 3. This is the order in the document as well. So if I do the source code view here, view page source, I see the... What am I doing? This is not 997. I've got my elements. Inspect element. I've got my 1, 2, 3 in that order here. Now, if I change that in Flexbox and say the ordinal group is not 1, but it's actually 0, I can move my 2 to the front of that. So the HTML order is not important any longer. And this is why Flexbox is so hard to implement. Because we render according to the order, and then we look at the CSS and position it on screen. And now with Flexbox, you're like, oh, wait, this actually goes there, and we have to restart the whole rendering process. But it's just, for me as a user, this is just so cool. Because I can shift things around just in my CSS without having to any change in the HTML itself, and without to any floating order or something like that. That allows me to just position things any way I want to. And it's a very, very powerful thing to have. So look at Flexbox if you want to do layouts, especially for mobile. Yeah.
Flexbox is pretty cool for doing horizontal layouts or sequential layouts, essentially. But we have also had this huge problem of vertical alignment for a very long time in browsers as well. And we've been trying to do all kinds of hacks, putting like views overlay, and then putting all kinds of display on it, and putting an inline element. we have, as you said, there are 60 ways of doing layout for most of the things. Same for the vertical alignment. Does Flexbox answer that as well?
Yeah, as I showed earlier, it's like if you do the Mozbox align start here, it shifts it to the start. If you do it to the end, it actually does it to the end. And you can also, if you have several elements after another, you can also give them an ordinal group of top, bottom, and shift those around as well.
How about if I have a div that I want to be horizontally and vertically centered on a page?
The simplest way of doing that is actually give it a top and left of 50% in absolute, no, not margin, transform. Minus 50 transform, minus 50 transform, and then you center everything.
It's still a hack. I was wondering if there is something being proposed for handling.
Yes, there is one. I don't know what the syntax is right now, but there is a vertical centering for elements in the page finally as well. A lot of people don't understand that a document is not 100% height of the screen, because you have to define that as well first. But for example, the image that I have in the slide deck here, that exactly uses that centering thing. So if you inspect that element and you look at the CSS, you see position absolute, top 50%, left 50%, transform, translate, minus 50, minus 50%. So that way I push it to the middle of the screen and shift it to the half of the width of the element itself. So the element can change, it will always be centered in both ways. Yeah, that is number one complaint on Stack Overflow, like, oh, CSS can't do vertical centering. It's total shit, we cannot use it for anything. Okay, like, how about all the other cool stuff? Like, it doesn't matter, I can't center in there. Oh yeah, well also the v-align in CSS is not necessarily what you expect, because it's not for boxes, but it's meant for text. So you still have the baseline offset and these kind of things, so it's just dirty and another hack. So what else is coming in CSS? Scoped style sheets. This is really, really cool. Because what that means now, if I just put a scoped on that one, then the P, the color hot pink, will only be inside that div. Like I define a color blue, and that would actually mean that, actually quite a stupid demo, because if I had another P up there, it would be hot pink in a normal HTML element. Whereas if I put scoped on it, it only scopes it to the element that the style element itself is in. So that way we can finally make little widgets that are styled on their own and don't get any CSS from the main document. So no margin, no padding, no font facing, none of the cascade goes into that element. That way I can actually have a video element, for example, in there, or a music player or something that is in the colors of the company, rather than the colors of the company messed up by the CSS around it, which we have right now. So scoped style sheets will be is a very interesting thing. It's right now, I think, only in Chrome. Let's see, scoped. Yes. Oh, Firefox. What? Okay. So apparently it's in support unknown in Chrome and support in Firefox. Hey, we're awesome. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but that's always the dirtiest thing ever. Like, I mean, like, when people get always very excited about CSS variables, I always point to this thing that I've written in PHP in 2006 that was a preprocessor of CSS that we used internally in the agency that I worked in. You can always pre-process everything. Then you can write Ruby and it becomes CSS. It's possible, but it's not necessarily simple. I'm actually finding myself, with my whole vast knowledge of CSS and JavaScript and HTML, feeling incredibly silly when I look at the blogs nowadays. Because like, hey, I'm centering an image. First you need to use grunt, then you use to do that, then you need to use this and this and this. And I'm like, when did the terminal become the first thing to use when I want to write some CSS? But the power of like build scripts and the power of packaging systems and is great, but we get far too excited about them at times. I think sometimes just writing my CSS because the browser already knows it is a good thing. And when I look at the syntax of mixins, for example, in Sass, it looks like JavaScript and PHP had a child and something went wrong. It's like, oh yeah, and the tab index is very important, and you're like, what? Like, it's kind of weird. It's not easy to come up with a programming language. And I mean, I worked a lot with Rasmus Lerdorf when I worked in Yahoo, and he admitted that PHP was just a mistake. He admitted that PHP was just made to build his own website with, and then out of a sudden it became successful and everybody was excited about it. But the syntax of it is awful, and that you need to know the order of the parameters of every function and method always fascinated me. Like, the amount of times I just started writing PHP and had to have the documentation open, although I've used it for 8 years, is just stunning. Variables is was another proposal where I can say I can var header color, and it's the color of that color, and then I can use it in my links as like var main color and var secondary color. That is what people want to have a lot. I see that a lot in terms of like keeping CSS maintainable. You want to make sure that you have your colors in one block, and then you actually can apply it to the rest of the document. And preprocessors are good for that. Variables, I think, are I'm going to bite that again, aren't I? Variables? Really? Interesting. It's not even there. Okay, sorted. So variables are a good idea. Don't know how far we push CSS with that, though. I'm always worried about that. CSS was meant to be a declarative language. It's meant to be to style something, to make something beautiful. And with the mix-ins and all kind of stuff, we turn it more and more into a scripting language. We turn it into JavaScript. The same way a lot of people with libraries turn JavaScript into Python or JavaScript into Ruby because they're much more happier with that other language, rather than just, yeah, why not understand the thing? Gives you more power. It's actually frustrating because somebody who works on standards bodies and somebody works for a browser, we want to standardize this stuff. We don't want to be different to Safari, to Internet Explorer, to Chrome. But if you don't use the things and tell us which one is the better one, we can't. Instead, people use preprocessors and just tell us like, why isn't CSS like Sass? Like, okay, because then your browser would be about 50 times slower than it is right now. So we cannot just say this is better. Same with like, why isn't JavaScript jQuery? Because jQuery is a different way of doing JavaScript. And the web and browsers are meant to be backwards compatible. We cannot just change it overnight and say like, hey, These 60 million websites from 1997 to now, not needed any longer. You write the web this way now. This is not going to happen. So make sure that you try and play with that. Mixins is the other one here. So you got a mixin error, which defines background, FTD, color, and red, and then you put the mixin error into all the other ones, and that would put that CSS into the other ones. So that way we can write much less CSS code, which is cool. We don't repeat ourselves all the time as well. And we keep it maintainable by actually having it in one space rather than having to change it in 5 spaces if later on it needs to be a blue color rather than a red color. This is done in SAS right now quite nicely, and in browsers as well. I think the standard is a bit confusing. Like the mixin specification is like, okay, what are we doing here? It's not a method, it's not a function, it's a mixin, and we do that in JavaScript as well. So there's a lot of stuff coming our way. It will be powerful. I don't know if it's actually necessary for everybody. Let's see. This is something I wanted from the very beginning ever in CSS, and it's still not in there. Like, it drives me crazy. Like, why do I have to say table HL TDLN instead of just and have like the same selectors repeated 15 times instead of just being able to just nest them this way? I would love to have that. For every table that has a class of HL, all the TD with the class of LN should have that. If the table class changes, it's not going to get applied. If I change it, if I need to change the class name of the table, I don't have to change it in all my selectors. I have to change it once. This would be wonderful to have, but it's not in there yet. Let's see if that's tracked. Nested selectors. No, not even a proper proposal yet. So it's not going to get anywhere anytime soon. Precompilers, less SAS compass. Does all the things you want to do with these experiments right now. Has a bit of overhead of, less runs in JavaScript. SAS runs in Ruby, Compass, I don't know. But it's actually preprocessors that change your CSS into something else. You can make it part of your build process. You can make it part of your IDE. You can do these kind of things. It's just, it gives you much more power, but it also means if somebody gets your code later on and has to maintain it for you, they have to know less or CSS or SAS and not just CSS. Probably in the end, it will be better for teams to actually use that kind of stuff, because then you have much less code and much easier to understand. But new people coming in have to be coached on a new system that they might not know, or you have in your hiring process actually say you have to know SAS as well, which means you can hire less developers because not everybody knows it. The other problem, of course, is that you use magic. Like, hey, look, I've got 3 lines of SAS, and my CSS then gets generated is 6,000 lines, and then I wonder why it doesn't perform on a mobile device. So sometimes trying to optimize the CSS itself rather than going into more and more preprocessors might be another way of doing it. I don't mind. But there is a danger of obesity. There's a danger of creating 3 lines of code and doing lots and lots of stuff that I don't realize. It's always easy to write a wrapper function that does a lot of things, and then it looks like you're only using 1 line of code. You're not. You're still using lots and lots of lines of code that are just behind the scenes. They might be precompiled, they might be doing some good things, but you actually create a lot of code that you do. So use CSS in general with care. Like, make sure that, is that animation really useful? Is it really necessary? Or might it be good to check first if somebody has a certain environment, if somebody really wants to have animations? What about you test if the browser has enough battery before you do the animations? That'd be cool. Like, hey, this thing animates, it's beautiful, you're 20% down on your battery, shall I turn off the animations for you so you have another hour to read your emails? That's the kind of functionality I expect from a piece of code in 2013. But sadly enough, we don't have it yet. Or have we? That's what Robert's going to talk about. One of the things I played with yesterday was this one here, where we had a training on presenting, and I just said that JS Fiddle is a great idea to play with things. This is a power meter. And this is the code for it. A meter element, which is now not supported in Safari iOS 7 from yesterday onwards again. This is what it looks like in Firefox on my Mac. And all I had to do is do a query selector meter, get the meter element, do a navigator battery add event listener level change. So if the level of the battery changes, it should refresh that and call that function show. The function show says the value of the meter should be the battery level. and then I call show to actually render it for the first time. This works on Firefox, Firefox for Android, Firefox OS. Is an open specification proposal, the web APIs, the battery API. Safari supported it already. So, and this is pretty cool that I can do these kind of things that simply nowadays. I can also say like, oh, let's fake that I've got a bigger battery and say like, do this times 2 and run that one, and then like, oh, I've got more battery out of a sudden, unless it stops loading. Yay. And when I put the changing in, when I put the battery in and starts changing, then I get all kind of functionality from the browser as well. These are the web APIs that we're working on right now for the next generation of cool stuff. Or now if you support Firefox OS, but you're going to hear much more about that from Robert if you go into his talk. If not, you don't. A really good way of thinking about CSS, especially with like large environments, is to start thinking about methodology, how to use CSS. There's OOCSS, which is by Nicole Sullivan, and there's SMAX CSS by Jonathan Snook. I work with both of them in Yahoo. I think it's quite weird that all people in Yahoo came up with better ways to write CSS. Not going to mention that, but they're both really good ideas. Both of them are very opinionated as well. A lot of them are like, oh, if you use an ID, you're a bastard and you're going to get kicked out of town. Take it with a piece of advice and think about it a bit more and see it as a guidance. Especially SMAX is good at that. But it's a good idea to start thinking about using CSS in a scalable manner than just using CSS, which we did for the last 5 years. Like, hey, just put more code in. My best example is visitbritain.com. Visitbritain.com was the project that I did when I lived in India in 2003, I think. Yeah, 2003, something like that. I came over, and for 4 months we built the tourism portal of England, completely built in India, which is like quite funny. And it was a .NET content management system based. So Tridion, it was 37 languages, 250,000 pages per language content. We needed a template that had like 12 different layouts, what we got from Photoshop. The CSS that I've written was 220 lines of CSS to support all the layouts that we needed to have. I left the company, I left the project went into maintenance mode, got sent to somebody. 2 months later, 7,450 lines of CSS. Because people just put like, yeah, and more selectors, more important, more colors, overwriting what was before. Don't look at what was before, we just put a new CSS style sheet in that will overwrite the other one. Put inline styles to make sure that it really gets overwritten. I found class names like fat headline, dark blue left. Like, why do you define your CSS in the name of the CSS already? This is not how CSS works. So make sure that you think about the CSS and plan it properly. There's a CSS survival guide. Write CSS to make maintenance as easy as possible. The maintenance will mess you up. This will actually make your product bad. This is what you should think first and foremost. Writing code is easy. Writing maintainable code is hard. Maintaining code is friggin' annoying. So the amount of times I was shouting at a piece of code and wonder what kind of idiot wrote that, realizing that it was me a few months ago without documenting it, is quite high. So make sure that you write code for the next guy that takes over from you. Think of him as like a this like homicidal maniac with an axe that knows where you live. Like every time you don't document things, he will come by. What gets created is important, not how few lines you write. We got this fetish of saying like, oh, with that mix-in and that JavaScript library, you do 3 lines of code and you've got the effect. And you're like, how does the effect work? What does it do to the browser while it's rendering it? That's a very, very important part and a very, very important question to ask. Keep up to date. Hacks tend to linger too long. Layout tables, my favorite example. Things like, even like image replacement of headlines is still being used by people that don't know that you can embed fonts nowadays. All kind of hacks that went around there, people say, oh, okay, that's solved. Web development is never finished. It's never solved. There's always new browsers, always new platforms to support. Prefixes are things to try out. Don't rely or trust them. You remember the background button that only was white on white because somebody used WebKit prefix? These things change from under you while you're using them. These are there to try things out. I actually, funnily enough, a lot of people in Chrome disagree with me, but I like that the Blink engine now doesn't use prefixes, but actually puts it behind a flag. Because this new experimental functionality is only for us developers to play with. End users should not suffer a broken interface just because we try something out. So make sure that you use prefixes always with a fallback that actually is unprefixed. If you can avoid images, do it, of course. Embrace the squishiness. There is no fixed size. There's no thing you can say, my users have to have a 1024 pixel resolution. That was funny on iPad, because iPad came out, it was 1024 resolution, and people were like, awesome, we have got a fixed resolution, we can make all of our designs 1024 pixels. And then the iPad mini came out, which says it's 1024 pixels, but isn't. It's got like 40 pixels less on each side, so it has this frame around it. You cannot detect in any way if it's an iPad or an iPad mini. It doesn't tell you in any way. So you're basically like, okay, my layout is broken and I have no way of detecting it. So make sure that you use percentages, EMs, positioning with percentages as often as possible, and let the thing grow, let the thing move, because you have to support all the different hardware out there. There's no such thing as a fixed environment. I'm right now doing Firefox OS. I mean, you can give these out later, you can play with that. It's basically an operating system that is written in HTML5. Nothing on here is not HTML5, CSS, or JavaScript. The operating system itself, all the applications, all the layout, all the scrolling, all the things that are happening. 320 pixels by 480 pixels, these are these devices. We're building better ones, well, we're not, our partners are. So the amount of apps that I get that are only 320 pixels, and I'm like, no, think ahead, think half a year ahead. There's a new thing coming out, make it float, make it resize, like put your media queries in. At least put in a media query for saying 320, and then put another media query in for larger. And embrace the squishiness also means that you don't make just the sizes. Like on a touch interface, for example, a button is great. But a button that allows you to gain like 20% around it or 20 pixels around it with a margin, so you don't have to hit the button right in the middle of it, is much, much better. Give breathing space to things, because people have small screens nowadays and big screens, and fiddly little things where you need pixel perfect is not going to happen any longer. No-nos in CSS, highly specific selectors, very bad idea, like the hash main, hash body, left align, blah, 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 blah. Because every time you change that, you have to change it everywhere in the document. We've got great IDEs nowadays and editors that allow you to do that, but it should not be the case. The shorter your selector is, the more it easier is. Important is not a toy. Don't use important. Important is basically used by browsers internally for a lot of stuff. That's what it's the only thing that is useful. And important in CSS shows me you messed up and you did not know how to fix it. You say, I'll put important there, it's got to work. Inline styles are a very, very, very last resort. The same with inline event handlers. The amount of people that I see that give me great canvas demos and have a window onload in it. Like, what is this, 1998? Like, no, don't put any inline things into the HTML because your HTML changes. Drop shadows and gradients on animated elements. I talked about this. Turn them off when you animate them. You can do that with an on animation start and on animation end, for example, where you can turn off the shadows. IDs are unique. Are you sure the thing you style will always be? Like, that's like people use like IDs on everything, and you're like, are you sure this will only be once in that document? And if it's not, use a class. There's not much performance difference nowadays between getting a group list of classes and the one in ID. Get element by ID was always the fastest. No, hands down, there's no way around that. But a query selector class or get elements by class name is quite fast as well. Lots of files are good in production, bad for the final product. So the amount of people who have like 50 CSS style sheets and 20 JavaScript files in there, you have not listened to a single performance talk that has been given in the last 8 years. It's so easy to package CSS up and package JavaScript up into a single file and to generate CSS sprites. I don't want to wait for a lot of stuff, and it's funny when you have my life and you're in hotels and airports and trains all the time. The amount of times I can't look at a website because it just tries to load some tracking JavaScript, or it tries to load some extra CSS that got dynamically loaded by something else without me knowing what's going on, and it stops the whole rendering of the page. is annoying. Make sure you inline as much as possible. Make sure you load only a few things. There's no such thing as this will always be 10 characters. This is my favorite when you talk to Americans about interfaces, and they're like, okay, this menu element is 10 characters. I always translate the thing into German then. And like try to fix that. I flew over from Poland to England before I came here, and I flew with Lufthansa, and they have this oxygen mask when it comes down. That announcement was in German and in English, and my favorite was it's the flow of oxygen is the regulation of the flow of oxygen, which is a full sentence in English, is a word in German, and it says Sauerstoffzuflussregulierung. So these are kind of words that I put in there and say like, now make it fit. So make sure that things are squishy, that things can expand. Also, there's overflow ellipsis, which is a really cool thing to do. So that way it has a dot 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 at the end, which can be quite. Make sure that it's not embarrassing as well, because that can be like sometimes words get shortened to something with 3 dots at the end that you didn't want to show. Like Steve Saunders had that problem at a conference where his presentation title was Steve Saunders explains analysis of log files, and I'm not going to go further. And that's all I had for the presentation. So I think we got ourselves a break. So how about we do like a 10-minute break and then come back with some Q&A, and then we can play a few things and try some things out. That's basically what I had for presentation. We can then do for questions and go with it. This is also a CSS animation. These two are just generated content. This is basically a border, another border, and this is a gradient on another generated element. Doesn't exist, not graphics, but it's awesome.
Who created your logo?
Oh, that's Jean Martel, the same guy who did the Firefox logo. He's so good. It's painful. I am.